The passing of legendary football coach Don Shula, who was much more than that in South Florida. I mean, what was Miami before the Dolphins? I mean, growing up outside of the Orange Bowl, I didn't know a damn thing about Miami.
The next thing I knew about Miami after the Miami Dolphins was Miami Vice.
Okay.
I mean, that's
Right.
a pretty big gap.
Right. That's true.
I
That
mean,
is
that's
true.
70s to I graduated high school in 87, and that was the rage about when I graduated high school.
Yeah, when you started high school, actually, but it started to really become a big deal in
Yeah.
'84. You probably just caught on a year or so later.
Oh, I'm just that's the time
Right.
frame. You know, mid
Yeah.
80s, mid to late 80s is Miami Vice time. So yes, that was the next time Miami was relevant for anything other than Don Shula and the Dolphins.
But what he meant and all the money that he raised for charity and of course making the Dolphins an iconic NFL franchise, which is difficult for a generation of fans to believe. But they were. I mean, for 30 years, and Shula was there for 26 of them, the 70s, the 80s, and well into the 90s, the Dolphins were an iconic franchise. They were a brand in the National Football League.
They were a
And
5 time a year on national television. They were
boy,
Monday
were they
Night
ever.
Football. We saw David and I have talked about it and referenced it so many times. When you watched ABC in the 70s, you saw the Raiders, the Steelers, or the Dolphins, and that was it.
Yep.
That was it.
And
And
the
when
Dolphins were my AFC team that I always had a little bit of a soft spot for. Because when I was first becoming a sports fan, 7, 8, 9 years of age, that's Super Bowl 7, 8, 9. Well, Shula and the Dolphins won 7 and 8. And Mark, let's be honest, as you mentioned, there were 5 teams in the NFL in the mid 70s. Really. In the NFC, the big two were the Cowboys and the Vikings. Well, I was a Giants fan, so I couldn't have a soft spot for anybody else in the NFC. Well, then we went to the AFC. My mother was a Steelers fan, so I didn't want to root for the same team my mother did. It came down to the Dolphins or the Raiders. Well, what can I tell you? I like their uniforms.
So did my mother. My mother liked their uniforms and Larry Zonka.
Yeah,
Those two things seemed to work for Jackie. And so I had a soft spot for the Dolphins because my mom liked him. And I guess as a kid, I didn't have allegiance to a team because my team sucked. My local team was bad. So I liked, I didn't see there being a problem. I'm 4 years younger, 5 years younger, 4 years younger than you. I didn't have a problem in the mid 70s liking the Steelers, the Dolphins, and the Raiders. I liked players on all of them. I collected football cards, and there were, loved Fred Biletnikoff with the long hair and the eyes. And the Dolphins there was something cool about their unis because no one wore orange and
Aqua.
teal. Right.
Aqua. No one wore aqua back then.
My bad. I'm sorry.
No. That's fine. But, seriously, by the mid 80s, it became the rage. And you got to realize, these guys have been playing football in this for a generation already. That's real men right there. Real men. Larry Zonka wore aqua. Okay? Kicked your butt in aqua. That's how tough they were. But Don Shula, 90 years of age, was on the show quite a few times, actually. We hadn't had him on in our second act. Last time we had him on was in our final year in our first act. And I caught the wrath of Coach Shula.
I'm glad you brought it up because you pissed off Coach Shula.
I did.
And you didn't mean it's
Not
one
at
of
all.
it's one of 5 occasions in which I've worked with David. Actually, I've worked with him for 4. I missed the one with Gene Deckeroff. We had not yet teamed up. When David asked a sincere question that was interpreted incorrectly. And I have your back on every one of these. And with Coach Shula, you did not at all mean for it to go that way, but Don got pissed at you.
Boy, I'll tell you, I knew what it was like to be an offensive lineman and jump off sides. Man, oh man. Coach still had it in him.
And what's hard is that we alternate questions. And many people have confused the two of us as being one. We think we sound differently, but there are people that think we sound very similarly. And it's why we laugh even more when we're in different places and people will answer me and say David. And but there's two parts of that. You got the jumping offsides procedure call, wrath. I had to be the one to speak next, fearing my life that if the question's not good, it's coming back at me again.
Or this interview is going to be over. He's going to look at his PR guy and go, "What'd you book me with these two yahoos for?" But had a few encounters, not just over the phone with Coach Shula. I had two with Coach Shula. Was and I don't know if they still do it, but in the 2000s anyway, a thing that the Shula's steakhouses did was Coach Shula would come through town at least once a year. And when he did, his media folk, it was their job to figure out 8, 10, 12 people, usually in the media, and they would take them out to dinner. And you would have a dinner with Don Shula. Now imagine getting that call. Hey, do you have time a week from Tuesday at 6 o'clock to join us and about 8 other people? We're going to have a private dinner with Coach Shula. You're like, I'm sorry, do you have the right number? Do you know who you're calling? My name's David Moulton. You must have the wrong number. No, you're on our list. So I got that call twice. I went the first time. The second time I did a solid for a couple of guys we used to work with. The one is a huge Dolphins fan. Idolized Shula. And for whatever reason, they weren't on the list. And I said, hey, can you take me off it? And can you find a way to put these two on and what have you? And so it made their day. And so, I did a solid for a couple of guys. And the only other time, Mark, and you can imagine the old, you just want to be a fly on the wall. Gary's first year, Gary Danielson, with the SEC on CBS is 2006. Well, Don's son is the coach at Alabama, and Alabama came to the Swamp, play Urban and the Gators. And in the first couple years, I used to go down on the field with Gary before games. And I don't know why I stopped doing it, but one day he said, "You want to come down?" And I said, "No," and he's never asked me again. And so, but
God, that is years, so good. I just need that to resonate for right. Just because that is so Gary.
He just stopped asking. He's like,
"Well, you're damn right." You said no.
Fine. Yeah,
you said so no.
We go to, now,
you're dead
now
to me.
The funny thing is, we go down separately. Now, how we don't even. When I go down separately from him. But the first few years we would go down together. So here it is. It's like, I don't know, week 4, week 5 of the season. And at midfield, imagine this circle. It's Urban Meyer, Don Shula, Gary Danielson, and me. Well, you can imagine how much talking I did. Well, that would be none.
You were chomping at the bit, though. How many questions did you have that you had to pass on? 74?
No, it's one of those times in which you're like, man, I really shouldn't be here. What am I doing here? Is there a way to just quietly slide out of this? People are filing in the stadium and they're kind of like, oh, that's Urban, that's Coach Shula. They recognize Gary and it's like, who's that other guy?
Right.
And so, yeah, so that's going on. I'm thinking, is there a way for me to slide out? But instead, Mark, held my ground at the end, made sure I shook his hand, looked right at him and said, Coach Shula, all right, and said, you've been kind enough over the years to come on our show because you and I had just started working together a few months earlier, been kind enough to come on the show, and you just hosted us for a dinner at your fine steakhouse, which, Mark, amazingly, I had dinner at just before the season started. First time I ever had dinner there where I paid. And so I made sure to, tell him what a fine job his staff did at his fine restaurant in Naples. How about that?
Way to go.
How about that suck-up job right there? It was all true, but that's, way to finish strong because that's all I contributed to that conversation. Let me tell you.
But an icon has passed at 90. And, even with Marino and D-Wade, and I don't... There's an Atlantic Ocean between Shula and the next biggest sports figure in Miami.
Well, certainly of a couple of generations.
I still think going through because he carried that carried that much weight till his death.
Yes. Well, and Kim Bokamper was quoted yesterday as saying, we were all concerned about his health in recent years, and this still has just hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. And Larry Zonka reduced to tears, saying, I never envisioned a day without Coach Shula.
Larry Zonka yesterday with Andrew Siciliano on the NFL Network started breaking down a little bit, and he said, I never thought of Coach Shula as a brother, never thought of him as a stepdad. I never thought of him as that family member until I got the call this morning, and I have not been able to control myself since.
Larry, now, I believe he was at his farm in Ohio. Okay, I don't know if it's not the time of year because he's, I think he still goes to Alaska during the summers and what have you, but I believe he was at a farm in Ohio when they got a hold of him. But Coach Shula, who turned 90 earlier this year, and fortunately enough, they threw a surprise birthday party for him. It was a big event. There were a lot of pictures of it making the rounds yesterday. So glad that they could all get that in. And then, of course, he was honored and toasted and celebrated in around the Super Bowl this year, in which word was that he closed the party, Mark, that the owner's party, that Don Shula was there until the end. So good deal. Coach Shula passing away yesterday at the age of 90. I'd like to hear your thoughts. 479-5551, whether or not you want to call in or just text in your thoughts at 479-5551 on the passing of Don Shula, particularly if you're of a certain generation and if you're a Dolph fan. Man, he was your franchise, wasn't he? He was your franchise for the longest time, and goodness knows the franchise has not been the same since, and he hasn't coached since the 95 season. 479-5551 is our number. The starting five is next. Miller and Moulton, Southwest Florida's Fox Sports Radio.